I don't know if there's an engineer or scientist out there that needs to remember, like, hey, be in love with science, be in love with what you're doing, but have no pressure that's like your end all be all. And don't put so much pressure on yourself. I think it's really easy to follow the cycle of achievement. Where's your next accomplishment coming from? Are you on enough committees? Are you doing enough extracurricular work? And I fall into this trap all the time. Sometimes it's okay to just enjoy something and not get it done.
You're listening to the Faith and Work Podcast, where we explore ways to serve God and others in our daily work to bring life and hope to workplaces and cities. Welcome to the Faith and Work Podcast. I'm Joanna Meyer, your co-host today. I serve as the Executive Director of Women Work and Calling, a national initiative founded here at Denver Institute, and I'm joined by Brian Gray, the Institute's Vice President of Formation. Hey, Brian.
Good to be with you. I always enjoy podcasting with you and joining your curiosity about other people.
It is so fun. We haven't done this in a while, so it's
been
great to be back
a
together.
couple minutes.
Yeah, today we're continuing with our Voices from the Workplace series, which explores the experience of leaders working across industries. It's our second episode featuring people working in the scientists, and we'll be hearing from metallurgist Chloe Johnson. Chloe is a longtime friend of Denver Institute and someone that Brian knows well. She's an alumnus of the 5280 Fellowship. I'm wondering, Brian, what have you appreciated about this series, and specifically, why are you so excited to interview Chloe today?
One of the things that has been great about the podcast series gets caught up in one of the ideas that also was one of the favorite parts of the fellowship for a lot of the participants, is the idea of interacting with believers who are really committed to their craft and excellence in their work in a bunch of different industries that aren't your own. So you end up getting to have this very cross-disciplinary type of learning. And I think the podcast series has really brought that out, which is fun. But fun and specific, this is Chloe Johnson. So Chloe is a nerd, which is a compliment in our world. She's very gifted intellectually and in the sciences, but very fun, surprisingly right-brained for a scientist. And her work in particular is in the applied sciences. So it's coming down in kind of the industrial level. So it's not just going to be lofty ideas, but it has practical application for the world we live in. So for a lot of reasons, Chloe's just a interesting, integrated, fun person.
Chloe's a ton of fun. So I'm excited for today's conversation. Let me tell our listeners a little bit more about our guest. Chloe Johnson is a metallurgist specializing in aluminum alloy development for additive manufacturing, which is a fancy way of saying the metal side of 3D printing. She has a PhD from the Colorado School of Mines and got her undergrad at Clemson University. Previously, she worked for a metal supplier that supported metals for 3D printing, and she now works for Beehive Industries on a team that designs small jet engines for defense applications. I mean, it's fascinating work, so I can't wait to dig in. Welcome to the podcast, Chloe.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Chloe, listen, of all the people we've crossed paths with at Denver Institute, your work is unique for sure. So how did you develop an interest, particularly the sciences, and then with work in metals and materials?
Yeah, so I'm definitely a weirdo. So I originally wanted to be an artist when I was in high school and was on track to go to like an art academy and everything like that. And was just like, I don't know. I don't know if this is it. And shifted gears, was like, well, I like rocks. I'll be a geologist. This will be fun. And I toured a school in South Dakota School of Mines of all places, because my mom's from South Dakota. And you could tour 2 departments. So I went to geology and then I went to metallurgy. I was like, what the heck is that? And we went by the metallurgy department, and the professor was just super excited on what he was working on. And he was working on friction stir welding at the time, for those who might be nerds of that. But basically, it's like a solid state welding process. You don't melt anything. And typically the welds are stronger than the base material, which it's usually inverted. It's usually the welds are weaker. So they were shooting missiles at friction stir welded plates. And I was like, well, that sounds awesome. Like, who doesn't want to do that? So I was like, all right, well, I would really love to do metallurgy, and just kind of shifted gears and got, lucky that it was just one of the coolest things ever. Yeah, pretty great.
That is amazing.
Fast forward to your work today. Give us a snapshot. This sounds inaccessible to a lot of other people. That's very different from a lot of people's work. Give us just a snapshot. What's a day in your working life like? I know it's got email, it's got all the same stuff with the rest of us, but just talk about what kind of work in applied metals looks like.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like my work has evolved throughout the years. I've worked in startup world my whole professional career. So I worked at a company that was at most, while I was there, about 40 people. And now I work for a company that's growing really fast. So we're actually at about 300 people right now. My work looks a lot like just being on the manufacturing floor and trying to bridge the gap between my team and manufacturing. So my team, being the materials team, will often advise our designers on how a material is going to behave, what the properties of it are, what materials they should use for different parts for different reasons. We'll catch lots of just random problems throughout the day. But a lot of what I do is kind of operational for our team, making sure we're organized and getting things done on time. And then when manufacturing has a problem, they'll come to me and be like, hey, can you talk to your team about this? Because my team's all, I should clarify. My team's all in Cincinnati at our R&D location. So they have no idea what's going on in manufacturing unless someone reaches out to them, and they don't really get to see it day to day. So a lot of times I'll come in and be like, hey, there's a lot of buzz around this problem. We better fix it, and be boots on the ground. So I'm very in between. I do a lot of process development, document writing, and then occasionally they let me in the back to go grind samples and things like that. So
shoot a few missiles.
Yeah, exactly. You get a little crazy. So
as we were warming up before we hit record, you described yourself as a scientist who was raised by salespeople, which I thought was just a really wonderful expression, because you are such a vivacious person. What is it like as a woman working in the sciences?
Oh, yeah. Great question. I think everyone's experience is a little different, is what I'll start by saying. I really appreciate about my company now that we have a lot of women that are very diverse, honestly, come from different backgrounds and things like that. And we have a pretty good community at work where a lot of us hang out pretty regularly and have space for that. I think some women have a lot of challenges where they either find they're the only person in the office, or they feel like maybe they're talked to differently. I personally have been fortunate that I've not had that experience. And actually, the surprising challenge that I've dealt with, and this was especially true in research, is other women can be pretty unhappy with you sometimes. You'd think a lot of times that we treat each other better, but a lot of times not purposefully. Honestly, I found you end up treating each other worse. So I definitely found that to be a challenge in grad school. But otherwise, my experience has been pretty good. Granted, I grew up with a brother. I grew up around a lot of guy friends and things like that. So I think certain things I kind of adjusted to, and then I've been very fortunate to have bosses and coworkers that are very supportive.
I'm going to make a hard shift and talk a little bit about the intersection of faith and science. Over the years, we've seen that it's pretty common for folks working in the sciences to experience a perceived tension between their faith and vocational commitments. I'm wondering if you've experienced any of those faith and science tensions. Hopefully you haven't, but how was your integration of faith and science supported through your faith community, if it was?
Yeah, I find this question really fascinating because I have never struggled to put the pieces of science and faith together. But I think it's the first question that pops in everyone's head when they think of science and faith, including lots of scientists. And there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, I was like, man, maybe I should have struggled with this more. But I remember being in undergrad particularly. And to preface this, I've always been a big Bible nerd. I love the Old Testament, read it growing up and everything, which is a little unusual for a lot of people. So to me, I always it just made sense in my head. I was like, yeah, this is just, this is okay. This is normal. I didn't really question it that much. But I remember I had a friend who, he always said he was an existentialist, which I thought was really interesting. I just never met someone who said they were an existentialist before. And he said, hey, you're really into geology. You're in this geology class. How can you sit in that class and feel comfortable? And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, aren't you a creationist? And I was like, I think so. and he was like, how can you sit in that class and be okay and not feel, threatened? And I was like, I just ask God questions when I'm sitting in class, and whatever answer he gives me, I'm okay with, even if I don't want to talk about that right now. And as I got older, I think that turned into, to me, it was a faith relationship of you know, especially coming to the Bible, like I trust God and understand him first. And then the Bible, I understand second in light of that. And I think as I got older and more people kind of asked me that question, I was like, okay, maybe I need to have some answers. I started listening to the Bible Project more. So I can't speak more kindly of Tim Mackey and John. Such a great podcast, such amazing resources. But they kind of helped me put words to what I always felt, which was, you know, people would try to explain how Genesis 1 could be fundamentalist or not fundamentalist and make sense, right? The days are millions of years, you know, they mean this scientifically, they mean that scientifically. And I felt like starting with the Bible Project and kind of their views, they were never kind of worried about it. And then I think Tim does a couple sermons on that, which is really helpful. And then there was a book called The Lost World of Genesis 1 by John Walton.
Brilliant book.
Such a good book.
Good.
And he really put words to it. And I was like, that's kind of how I've always felt, is like it actually doesn't matter. But, which it does. But like it doesn't, Genesis 1 is not science. So what John Walton talks about, and I highly recommend reading this book, it's very short. It's like 200 pages. He talks about ontology, or like the fundamental like science of existence, right? Like what was the purpose? Why did these things exist? And he says, you know, for us, from a modern Western worldview, we think, well, if I'm going to write a creation account, I'm going to talk about why something exists materially. You know, how was it made? How did I build that thing? What was it made out of? And he says the Hebrew people didn't think that way when they wrote this book back in, you know, probably from oral tradition as far back as like 1500 BC, right? They weren't worried about that. Their question was not how does something materially exist? Their question was what's the purpose? And so when God created something, he wasn't creating a material thing out of nothing in Genesis 1. He was giving it a purpose and a definition, which makes a lot of sense, right? Like if I were going to write a book about God and who he is, it's going to look super different from my point of view and probably look like, you know, a story of my life. When the Hebrew people wrote these things, they wrote them very different. They said, hey, let's use poetry. Let's talk about these kinds of ideas. Let's focus on functionality, not material existence. So John Walton does a much better job of describing it. But I think it's funny for me because a lot of times people come back to, oh, science and faith. Like, how do you reconcile those? And it's like, to me, there was never a question. But I think it is important to, you know, number one, remember that the first thing is God's a person, no relationship. But secondly, like, I think one of the women from, I think, NASA who came here and spoke, she was amazing.
Oh, yeah, Jennifer Weissman.
Yeah. Oh, she was amazing. And she said, all truth is God's truth. And I know there's a whole scientific community that talks about this. And that was really important for me. I was like, that's pretty cool to say that. Like, if we find out something is true scientifically, it's true to God too. Like, maybe we misunderstood somewhere else, not, you know, well, hey, God's against that, right? And I think that's a very freeing thought as well.
Yeah, part of my same journey I had a very, very short stint for 3-4 years working in the sciences. And part of my understanding of Genesis as God, when the Hebrew people capturing, well, who is our God like and what are people for, puts you into some amazing conversations and ones we're really interested in at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. But it's really helpful to overcome that. But also from my experience when I was working in the sciences, one of the challenges is that you can focus so much on kind of minute details. I remember a friend at the School of Mines who spent 3 years in research, and one minus sign was throwing off the entirety of the code in their in their work. Yeah, and so there's like you're so buried in these details, particularly work that's happening in academic research, but that level of detail is critical to the process. Could also feel really removed from your everyday work. Now you're in an industrial materials application. So how do you go back and forth from the deep in the details and back out to kind of keeping your feet on the ground with the reality of what you're building and making for the world?
Yeah, this is a great question. I actually really struggled with that when I was in grad school, especially. I remember my advisor would say, you always miss the forest for the trees. The funny part was I was missing the trees for the forest most of the time. When I would try to get into the weeds, I just couldn't understand it. So the funny thing for me is I'm actually a big picture person. And I found a lot of times in the sciences, people are detail oriented, right? Which is wonderful. It's very helpful for doing your work. but it can be really challenging if you're a detail person to come back out and remember what you're doing in the first place. And so I found on my teams over the years, a lot of times I bring that to the team of like, okay, why are we doing this? Like, where are we going next? And I do that to myself as well. So like I do a lot of document writing and standard writing and things like that. And those you have to be very detailed, and even like wording, people will debate words like you've never heard. Like it's entertaining to be in a room full of like grown-up professionals arguing over which word should go in a sentence. But it's important, right? Because we're scientists, we care about that. And I've found a lot of times what happens is you've lost trail of what you were trying to do, right? And so if you can back out and say, what are we actually trying to do? You might find the argument disappears. But I have to do that to myself a lot. And I've had to do that on teams a lot, is back us back out and go, okay, like what is our goal here? Because if we don't have one and we're just debating, that's fine. That can be a for funsies conversation, but maybe we need to go in a different direction.
Hey, I'm Luke.
And I'm Samantha.
And we're donors to Denver Institute for Faith and Work.
As entrepreneurs, our work can often feel all-consuming. The Denver Institute for Faith and Work has helped us to think both critically and theologically about how our business is impacting our workers and the communities we are a part of.
As Denver Institute pursues its mission to prepare people to serve God and others through their daily work, we look forward to the impact it'll have. This can't happen without the support of this community. If you've been encouraged by this conversation, or if your life has been shaped by Denver Institute, we encourage you to join us in giving to this mission.
To learn more or to make a financial gift, please visit the Give page at denverinstitute.org.
I think that's a skill listeners in all kinds of different work either are doing or could be benefited by doing. I find it even here, just recently backing up. Now, can we say this thing simply that we've given so much detailed attention to? And so it's really important to kind of back out and think big picture like that. Yeah,
it can be painful with engineers. We like to just tear things apart, often for no reason. I've found you'll be in a room and be like, what are we arguing about? So it can be character building to sit in a room and allow people to struggle between the detail and the big picture, because sometimes you need to. And that's definitely a skill I'm still learning, especially in industry committees where you want to let people argue it out for a certain amount of time, but then you have to know when to like cut it off and say, okay, we need to go back to our question.
The art of being a scientist and a manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a question for you about faithful practice at work, because we talked about how faith can agree with science. Now I want to think about how faith can inform science. What are some faithful attitudes? It might be awe or wonder or humility, or spiritual disciplines / practices can help people who are working in the scientists keep their spirit alive on the job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing as a scientist to remember is humility. I think that's a really hard one. Our culture, especially academics, I remember this was really, really hard when I was getting my PhD. Your culture is to be correct.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's great. Like I think people adore science because of the scientific method, where they think, wow, you get to, what we might call truth, which is not a great word. It's more like statistically probable. Statistically significant, but to be technical. But, we spend so much time arguing with each other to get to the best answer. And that's, I think, how people view it from the outside. But often if you're in the room, it's not always about that. It's about who's right. And it's so easy to do. I find myself doing it too, where you sit in a room and you're like, no, my way is the best, instead of thinking, how do we do this the best way that we can? And posturing that attitude towards, it's not about me, it's about serving the work and serving my team and serving this project. It can take a lot of humility, and it takes everyone to remind each other of that and encourage each other too. If you have a team where it's safe to be wrong, that's huge. And it's not often valued, and especially in leadership, it's encouraged to be right. Because if you're the leader, your biggest job sometimes, if you're not careful, is to correct people. And that's needed, right? Like you want someone you can come to and they can give you help and advice. But that pressure on leaders of you always have to be right, it can turn into ego, it can turn into fights, it can turn into problematic situations and really like a not fun place to work, honestly, at the end of the day. So I think humility is huge. As far as practices, I've found on the topic of humility, rest is huge. I'm a huge fan of the Sabbath, I think, because I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. So just like,
that?
yeah.
You didn't know that, Mike?
We may have talked about it. I forgot it.
I don't remember if we've talked about it, actually. Yeah. So I grew up, with the Sabbath. I know a lot of Seventh-day Adventists are very, very strict with how they do the Sabbath. Ours was pretty loose. It was mostly hanging out with family and stuff like that. But I have really good memories of it, and I still love it. It's really humbling, even just to go home at 5. Like, not just having a day of the week that you say I'm not working, which for scientists and engineers can be huge. We tend to work too much sometimes, as a lot of people do. It's common in America. But, just saying, like, I'm going to go home at 5. You know what? An hour here is not going to change anything. And, or hey, this thing's bigger than me. It's not about me. Remembering that the world is bigger than you are, and, you're not the most vital thing out there. I think that can be really helpful. And it's good for you. It's good to rest. We forget about that. And I think the one that I actually don't do as much as I should is the prayer of examine at the end of the day. I think can be really enlightening and really helpful. I think sometimes you miss people when you're working on technical work. And if you kind of think over your day, sometimes you're like, I think that person maybe was trying to tell me something, or maybe I said that harshly, or, maybe that didn't go how I wanted it to, or you might even think of a good idea as well.
Those make so much sense of work, both in the details, examine, just to slow down and pause and reconsider what might I have missed when I was so in that group of trees, if you will. But then also just the idea of limiting your work. The nature of the sciences is that you are often working on questions and coming up with solutions that others haven't answered yet, or there's a certain amount of power in being able to make something and to create what wasn't before your day of work in the materials or the industrial space. So I think in that concept of rest and limiting your work day is a really powerful, but even in your connection, a really humble thing to do.
I think it helps with creativity too. I can't tell you how many friends in grad school said, I went on a hike this weekend, I figured it out. Like I worked it out in my head as I was walking, which can be a bit of like a miracle story. It doesn't happen for everybody, but letting your brain rest or doing something else can definitely be helpful.
Well, let's talk about the types of pressures like that people who are working in the sciences may face in their daily work. Just the challenge of that unanswerable question or getting stuck, or what are the types of pressures are people in your field facing in their daily work?
Yeah, I think definitely like going back to that pressure of not failing. I think that's huge. I think that was something that I actually really loved going into industry, because you kind of just had to do something and nobody was really mad if it wasn't super like technical or well thought through. Like if you wanted to rub a little elbow grease in it and get back there with a wrench and figure it out, you could, right? And I think that was really helpful for me. But in academia, it definitely felt like, oh man, you have to have the answer and it better be pretty technically backed, right? Which can be a good thing, but it can be a lot of pressure. I think right now, I know we were talking about this a little bit before, Brian, some of the bigger pressures on science, the job market is tough right now. I think for a lot of like young scientists, that's pretty daunting.
Just even connected to funding cuts that are happening more recently.
Funding cuts.
Behind research dollars, applied sciences.
I think I would say I'm not as familiar with some of the more fundamental side of it, like more proposal writing and things like that. But I think that's definitely impacting research and academia and even industry. But even like, I think tech has been suffering for a long time. It's funny, we don't think of tech as being science, but it is, right? So it can be a different form of science, but even like people like material engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers are impacted by tech layoffs, not just our, computer science and software and hardware friends. And so that's scary. So like in the field I'm in, additive manufacturing, like our company is more defense related, but we do a lot of additive, and that's kind of my background. It's been scary for the last couple of years because it's a new manufacturing technique that hasn't quite gotten its legs under it yet. Like, it's being widely adopted, but it's incredibly expensive and people are very skeptical. And so, it's just one example of technology that's facing budget cuts or just not working, right? Like flopping. And I don't think it'll flop. I think it'll find its place. But for instance, the Department of Defense is funding a ton of work there because they're trying to see that industry actually survive, because they want to use it for different applications. So the better the industry is, the better their infrastructure is, the better they can use things like that. So that's kind of my world, but I'm sure there's plenty of other, tech areas where that's happening as well, where thankfully for us, the Department of Defense is watching and they're very well funded right now. But if that's not your sector, it's a little scarier.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question that's going to sound like it's from far out in left field because it relates to art and your work as a scientist, but you're one of the more multifaceted scientists. I know you have a really vibrant life outside the job. And for your 5280 fellowship, you did a project where you brought together artists and scientists because you thought that artists had something that could help scientists with their tendency to overwork. Tell us a little bit more about what you did and how you saw the work of scientists blessed through that project.
Yeah, that was a fun one. So I was still a student when I joined the fellowship. So the fellowship's like a 9-month program. For the first half, I was in school. In the second half, I started a job. The project I wanted to do, I was at a gallery at the time. So Denver has this cool art gallery co-op where basically you volunteer to get space. So you don't have to pay money. You don't have to be a certain type of artist. You can just go volunteer and hang art. So you meet a lot of really awesome local artists that are just, really interesting people. And at the time I was going through so much with grad school, I had a really bad experience. And especially graduating, it was just a nightmare. And I remember just being like, man, I just want other grad students to remember why they're doing what they're doing, like what the exciting and beautiful part of what they're doing is when they're downtrodden and having this terrible, stressful time. And so I thought, oh, this will be fun. The artists will be so excited. We'll pair a scientist and an artist. The artist will talk with the scientist about their work. They'll make a piece of art based on it. It'll be great. Well, I got about 3 grad student friends to do it. And then we were going to do, a big expo where we interviewed everyone and went over the artwork and the science work and everything. And the buzz was just super huge. I think the scientists were like, wow, I can't believe people care about what I'm doing, because grad student research is very niche. It's very specific. And the artists were just thrilled. We got on these Zoom calls because it was kind of slightly post-COVID to meet and talk. And I didn't really have to moderate anything. The artists just went off and just interviewed the scientists. In fact, we had to cut them off short because people wanted to keep going. It was kind of crazy. I think for me, though, it worked way better than I thought it was going to. And there was this community I was tapping into that just was looking for breath, just waiting for someone to give it life. And I think it really reminds us as technical people or even artists that we're multifaceted. Our job as scientists is not who we are. And I think so often we get lost in it and we're like, man, that next publication, that's going to be my mark. That's what everyone's going to remember me for. That work, my name, that's important. And that's how you're tracked too. I mean, impact factors are a huge deal for your career if you're in the fundamental sciences. So it's just part of the culture. And I think remembering hey, my name on that paper is not who I am. And it's not the end all be all, because you will get proven wrong at some point, unfortunately, in science. It will go away. And doing things like that, where maybe you're an artist, maybe you're an outdoorsman, maybe you like to build small shelves in your free time, maybe you like animals, whatever it is, taking that time to be there and to show up as a technical person. We don't often hear from scientists directly in the world, and I think people want to.
That's what I remember about the final night of the showing. So your whole project ends in an evening gallery showing, and there was a number of us that came out. But there was this mutual appreciation between working scientists and working artists. And then those who have, like myself, or a lot of us who have no chops in either one of those, to hear really beauty and creativity at the center of the dialogue, approach from an intellectual side or approached from an artistic creativity side. And it was, you could tell that there was a lot of mutual appreciation tonight. Which was really fun. Chloe, final question for you. What final encouragement would you offer to other Christians who are considering careers in the sciences or to your peers who are already working in those spaces? It's a kind of a final word of encouragement.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is maybe more of a personal note. I would encourage you to know, like, your purpose in life is not your work. I think when we did the fellowship, that was the question I was struggling with. I was like, I'm really not as inspired by engineering as I thought. I loved metallurgy fundamentally, but I was like, I don't connect to my work at all. I'm not excited, which most engineers are. Most, scientists, engineers are like, oh, I'm so excited about what I'm doing and what my final product is. And I think the fellowship shifted gears for me of like your, calling, so to speak. You don't have to figure out exactly what you're supposed to do. There's lots of reasons and ways you might do something, and it might change drastically over the years. But for me, what was helpful was like that pressure was off, and it was more about who I was becoming and who I was serving than it was about specifically what I was doing. So I don't know if there's an engineer or scientist out there that needs to remember, like, hey, be in love with science, be in love with what you're doing, but have no pressure that's like your end all be all. And don't put so much pressure on yourself. I think it's really easy to follow the cycle of achievement. Where's your next accomplishment coming from? Are you on enough committees? Are you doing enough extracurricular work? And I fall into this trap all the time. Sometimes it's okay to just enjoy something and not get it done. And I think I really struggle with that. Like even art projects, oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how many I've sprinted through and been like, that was a mistake. So yeah, I mean, just encourage you that you're probably out there doing great work. And sometimes you can just enjoy that and not have to get it done so fast.
So cool. Thanks for joining us today, Chloe.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're still the coolest metallurgist I know.
Hey, thanks.
What a gift to learn from Chloe. A few things stood out to me from this conversation. One was just the power of being seen for the work that you do. I think about the many, many scientists every day who are laboring to discover minute details in their work and how life-giving it is for someone to take an interest and celebrate their curiosity. I think that's something any worker in any industry would benefit from. And also, I appreciated how deeply Chloe understands the unique pressures within her industry, both to form and deform the inner lives of scientists. I'm wondering in your own work today, how God is either forming you in positive ways or how the pressures you face in your work are deforming the good work that God is trying to do in you. Today's show notes will have an abundance of links and resources for the books and websites that Chloe had mentioned. We also want to highlight an upcoming event. Denver Institute is proud to partner with our friends at the American Scientific Affiliation, which is a professional community of Christians working in the scientists. Will be co-hosting an evening event during their national conference later this month at Colorado Christian University. Dr. Abram Bixler, who is an agricultural expert and nonprofit leader with the Echo Global Farm, will be featured as the keynote speaker that night. He also was our previous interview in this series on the scientists. The event, again, will be at Colorado Christian University. It's Saturday, July 19th. It's an amazing opportunity to rub shoulders with some of the nation's sharpest Christians working in the scientists. Details will be available through a link in this episode's show notes, or you can go to the events section of denverinstitute.org. Thanks again for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Faith and Work podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. The Faith and Work podcast is produced by Denver Institute. We believe that when Christians work faithfully, the world will taste the hope and life that Jesus provides. To learn more or to make a financial contribution, visit denverinstitute.org.